In the village of Reed Fords, which huddled at the very edge of the Urnarian kingdom, no one had ever thought that an ordinary harvest day could end with a prophecy, a dragon, and a sudden betrothal to a whole brood of princesses. Caden Olheim, a 22-year-old guy with hands used to a plow rather than a sword, was just dragging a cart of turnips to the village market when the sky above the road darkened and the earth shuddered from a roar. "Is that a storm?" he asked aloud, addressing no one in particular because nearby there was only neighbor Gunnard's goat, which was always trying to devour his cabbage. The goat did not answer, but the dragon did. A huge, scaly carcass crashed from the sky straight onto the road 300 steps from Caden, crushing half the road beneath itself and forcing the poor goat to make a sound that a goat should not make. From the smoke and dust, limping, came a man in torn royal clothes, not young, with a crown slipped to one side, and with obvious traces of the fact that he had just miraculously escaped death. It was the Emperor of Ernaria, Veldor III, in his own precious person, flying home on a griffin from negotiations and shot down by the stray magic of a wild dragon. "Help!" he wheezed, falling right at Caden's feet. Caden, without thinking for long, did the only thing he knew how to do well. He grabbed a larger turnip and threw it straight into the muzzle of the enraged dragon, which was already preparing to finish off the Emperor with a second breath of flame. The turnip hit the dragon right in the eye. The dragon howled, recoiled, lost its balance on the rain-slippery ground, and with a crash flew back beyond the horizon, from where apparently it never intended to return and tell its friends how it had been humiliated by a root vegetable. Emperor Veldor III, lying on his back in the mud, looked at Caden with a long, strange gaze. "You saved my life," he whispered. "Well, actually it was just a turnip," Caden answered embarrassedly. "That is exactly how the magic of fate works, boy," the Emperor groaned, clearly still not having recovered from hitting his head on the ground. "You are now the chosen savior of the throne, and according to the ancient law of Ernaria on the salvation of imperial blood, you are obliged to marry one of my daughters and become the next ruler of the empire." Caden dropped the turnip. "Excuse me, what?" But the Emperor had already lost consciousness, and there was no one to talk to except the stunned goat. 2 weeks later, Caden stood in the middle of the throne hall of Ernaria, a huge room with columns of white marble entwined with enchanted ivy, which changed color depending on the mood of the palace owners. Right now it was anxious. Yellow, dressed in a suit embroidered with silver thread, which probably cost more than his entire village together with the goats. Beside him, the protocol advisor nervously fiddled with a scroll, a thin little elf named Findril Thin-Feathered, whose left eyelid twitched every time Caden did something against etiquette, that is, about once a minute. "Why exactly me?" Caden whispered while the herald unrolled another scroll with a decree. "Because you are the chosen savior, marked by the ancient magic of the throne," Findril hissed through his teeth, continuing to smile at the courtiers. "Because His Majesty has no sons. And because the law on succession to the throne of Ernaria states, he who saves imperial blood from death shall be joined in marriage with one of the princesses and inherit the throne. And if I refuse?" Findril turned so pale that he became almost transparent, like a true elf in a moment of horror. "Then 5 ducal houses will start a war over succession to the throne. The capital will drown in blood, and you will most likely be poisoned by breakfast in order to remove an inconvenient variable." "Understood. I will not refuse. A wise decision." The herald finally announced the entrance of the princesses, and the massive doors of white oak, decorated with runes of eternal protection, opened. Caden felt his fate finally and irreversibly change. Princess Ailantis Snowy, the eldest, heir to the ice magic of the northern peaks, with frost-colored hair and a gaze capable of freezing the fountain in the courtyard. She wore a crown of ice that never melted, and looked at Caden as if she were judging a turnip's suitability for soup. Princess Morella Sparkling, the youngest of the sisters, fiery red-haired, with sparks literally jumping between her fingers when she was nervous, or happy, that is, almost always. She clapped her hands with delight at the sight of the new contender. Princess Sylvana Quietwood, the quiet keeper of the kingdom's ancient libraries, with moss-green eyes and a spell book under her arm, which seemed to be her only true companion in life. Princess Dargit Steel, a warrior of blood, the only princess who had trained under the blades of Ernaria themselves, with 2 swords on her belt and a scar across her eyebrow, clearly not received at a ball. Princess Neely Shadowcolor, the most mysterious of the sisters. Half fairy on her mother's side, with violet eyes and the half smile of a person who knows in advance how everything will end, Caden looked at the 5 princesses and felt like that very turnip that had just been thrown at the dragon. Small, confused, and completely unprepared for his new role as a fateful projectile. "I have a question," he said aloud. To the horror of Findrel, whose eyelid began twitching with double force, "Could it be that none of you actually burns with desire to marry a peasant with a turnip? And we can just quietly agree that I will go back home to deal with the neighbor's goat?" The throne hall froze in shocked silence. Then Morella Sparkling giggled so brightly that sparks showered from her fingers, straight onto the marble floor, leaving little scorch marks. "I like this one," she declared. "He is funny." Ailantis rolled her eyes, and the temperature in the hall noticeably dropped by a couple of degrees. "He is hopeless." Dargit snorted, placing her palm on the hilt of one of the swords. "We will see what he is worth in battle." Sylvana did not raise her eyes from the book, only quietly turned a page. Nioli smiled a little wider, and Caden thought he saw something like anticipation of an ancient joke, understandable only to her alone, flash for a second in her violet eyes. Emperor Veldor III, still a little pale after the dragon shaking, coughed from the throne. "According to the law, the chosen savior shall spend time with each of the princesses during the season, and make a choice before the coming of the festival of the double moon." He looked at Caden with something like an apologetic smirk. "Good luck, boy. You will need it." Dargit Steele challenged Caden to a friendly sparring match already the next day, even before dawn, in the inner courtyard of the castle, with a full gathering of yawning courtiers who had clearly been notified in advance, because who in their right mind gets up at dawn voluntarily? "This is not mandatory, is it?" Caden asked hopefully, examining the training sword that had been shoved into his hands. "Absolutely mandatory," Dargit cut him off, warming up her shoulders. "If you become emperor, you will have to protect yourself. Otherwise, the very first envious lord with ambitions will slit your throat in your sleep in the very first week of your reign." An encouraging prospect for a first date. This is not a date. This is an assessment of combat suitability. "Well, at least it is some kind of assessment," Caden muttered, raising the sword into a stance he had seen once from the village blacksmith, and which was completely wrong. The fight lasted about 5 seconds, after which Caden found himself on his back, looking at the brightening morning sky, while the tip of Dargit's sword rested exactly against the hollow under his throat. "Weak," the princess stated without particular malice, rather with slight disappointment. "Actually, I handle a pitchfork pretty well," Caden objected resentfully, lying on the cold stones of the courtyard. "That is also a piercing object, by the way." Dargit unexpectedly snorted, a short, almost reluctant chuckle. "A pitchfork against the enchanted steel of the blades of Irnaria. An interesting battle strategy, peasant." "Hey, pitchforks are underestimated. Ask any rat in my hayloft." She stretched out her hand and helped him up. The grip was strong, confident, the hand of a person used to holding a sword, not a fan at balls. "You know," she said, brushing dust from his shoulder with an unexpectedly careful gesture, "most court dandies whom father tried to marry me to before would have cried into a pillow after such a blow." "Do I look like I am crying?" "You look like a person who is diligently pretending that he is not in pain." "It hurts a little," Caden honestly admitted, rubbing his bruised shoulder. Dargit snorted again, and this time something new flashed in her gaze, not an assessment of a potential opponent, but something warmer, almost curious. "Come tomorrow at dawn. I will teach you to hold a sword so that you at least are not killed in the first week on the throne. Is this a date?" "This is survival training, so a date with swords and potential injuries." Dargit blushed quickly, almost imperceptibly, but still blushed, and sharply turned around, walking away through the inner courtyard, leaving Caden sitting on the stones, rubbing his back and thinking that perhaps this palace life was not as awful as it had seemed yesterday. Findrel, who had been watching all this from afar, was quickly scribbling something in his scroll, muttering under his breath, "Day 1, Savior alive, a good beginning." Savior alive. Sylvana Quietwood was found in the great library of the castle exactly where Caden had expected to find her, having wandered there by accident while trying to escape another lesson in court etiquette, where he was being taught 17 different ways to bow depending on the rank of the person he was speaking to. "Hiding?" Sylvana asked, without raising her eyes from a thick folio whose pages softly glowed with golden magical light. "Hiding from the manor's teacher, Lord Idric of the Dusty Cloak?" Caden sighed, flopping down onto a bench nearby. He said that my bow insults the very essence of the monarchical system of Irnaria on a metaphysical level. Sylvana smiled slightly at the corner of her lips, still not tearing herself away from the book. Is your bow really that bad? So bad that in the end he asked me never to bow to anyone at all anymore, but just to nod my head from afar like a village goose. This time she laughed quietly, briefly, but genuinely, and the golden pages of the book in her hands blinked slightly as if responding to her mood. Sit closer, she said, moving over on the bench, since you were hiding here anyway. Caden moved over. Do you even want to get married? He asked directly, because diplomacy came to him about as hard as court bows. Sylvana was silent for a long time, studying the shimmering lines before her. I want to study the ancient magic of forgotten kingdoms, she said at last. I want to finish translating the manuscripts of the Eldorian library before they are finally eaten by magical mold. I do not want to rule an empire, and I certainly do not want to be someone's wife for the sake of convenient politics. Then why are you even here, in the palace, and not in some tower with books? Because father decided so, she finally raised her green eyes to him. And you, do you want to be emperor? I wanted the neighbor's goat to stop eating my cabbage, Caden answered honestly. That was the ceiling of my life ambitions until recently. Sylvana truly snorted for the first time in the entire conversation, and little golden sparks of laughter shimmered on the pages of the book, as if the magic itself had reacted to her amusement. You know, she said quietly, of all the contenders father has brought to the palace over the past years, you are the first who tells the truth and not what he is supposed to say in order to be liked. Probably because I cannot lie convincingly. I once tried to lie to my father about a broken cart axle. He saw through me in 5 seconds and made me fix it as punishment, and in the dark too. I like that, Sylvana admitted quietly. Strange, but I really do. She returned to reading, but Caden noticed how she unobtrusively moved the second magical candle closer to him so that he could see the pages more clearly over her shoulder. A trifle, but a truly warm trifle. Morella Sparkling did not seek privacy for the meeting. She simply burst into Caden's room early in the morning without knocking, with a tray on which something steamed that distantly resembled a pie. I baked you breakfast, she announced joyfully, and sparks of delight showered from her fingers straight onto the carpet, leaving several new decorative scorch marks on it. Caden looked warily at the pie, which crackled slightly, as if something inside it was still burning. Is this safe to eat? Absolutely. Well, almost absolutely. It may tingle the tongue a little. Fire magic sometimes seeps into the dough when I cook. Sometimes? Well, always, Morella honestly admitted, not embarrassed in the slightest. But it warms you from the inside on cold mornings. Caden carefully bit off a piece and felt a pleasant warmth truly flare up in his mouth, as if he had swallowed a little sunbeam. Not bad, he admitted with surprise. A little strange, but not bad. Morella beamed in the literal sense because the sparks around her flared brighter. Really? Usually everyone is afraid to eat what I cook after the incident with the soup that exploded right in the kitchen. The soup exploded? Just a little. Only one wall was damaged. Caden laughed sincerely for the first time in several days of court bustle, and Morella immediately plopped down beside him on the bench, forgetting all etiquette. You know, she said, suddenly becoming serious, which surprisingly suited her usually sunny face. Everyone treats me like a little girl who just smiles a lot and blows up baked goods. Ailantis is smart and cold, Sylvana is wise, Dargit is strong, Nioli is mysterious. And I just spark a lot. In my opinion, sparking a lot is also a kind of talent, Caden noted gently. Morella looked at him in surprise, as if for the first time someone had said something like that to her seriously, and not as a polite excuse. You are the first who says that? She admitted quietly, and for a second her usual ringing smile became real, deep, without the usual feigned cheerfulness. The sparks around her for a moment glowed with soft, warm gold instead of the usual bright orange flame. Caden understood. Behind all this fuss and exploding pastries, there was a princess who desperately wanted to be taken seriously at least sometimes. Ailantis Snowy invited Caden to her personal ice garden, a place so cold that breath turned into clouds of steam even in the middle of a summer day, and the roses there bloomed from ice, never withering and never giving off fragrance. Why did you call me here? Caden asked cautiously, shivering from the cold in his ordinary clothes. To see whether you can endure at least a conversation with me without chattering your teeth through every sentence. Atlantis cut him off without turning around, continuing to examine the ice rose in her hands. I am holding on so far, Your Highness, but I am generously grateful for the opportunity to practice dental percussion. Atlantis barely noticeably shuddered, not from the cold, but from something like restrained laughter, immediately hidden behind her usual icy mask. My father thinks that if he throws me into a room with a peasant, warm feelings will suddenly awaken in me, she said coldly. That is naive. Well, so far only a runny nose has awakened in me, Caden answered honestly. This time Atlantis could not hold back. A short chuckle still escaped, although she immediately frowned, as if angry at herself for this weakness. You're not afraid of me? She suddenly asked, looking him straight in the eyes with her icy gaze. Should I be? Everyone is afraid. The Ice Princess, heir to the northern peaks, capable of freezing a fountain with one look. No one ever talks to me so... simply? Caden shrugged. Well, I grew up next to a goat that can eat your arm up to the elbow for a carrot, and with a father who believes that the best cure for any illness is more physical work. After that, the Ice Princess does not seem so frightening to me. Atlantis looked at him for a long time, and something in her icy eyes thawed barely noticeably, just for a moment. You are strange, she said at last, but for the first time there was no coldness in her voice, only genuine curiosity. I have been told that before, Caden smiled, usually before throwing a turnip at a dragon. Atlantis blinked. What? Long story. She tilted her head slightly to the side, and the ice rose in her hands for a moment, glowed with warm blue light, as if answering its mistress's unspoken question. Tell me, she asked quietly. We seem to have time. Caden smiled and sat down beside her on the ice bench, which to his surprise turned out not to be as cold as it looked. Nioli's shadow color found Caden herself, as indeed always, appearing literally from the shadow of the corridor without a single sound, which made Caden jump in place every time. Do you do that on purpose? He asked, pressing his hand to his wildly pounding heart. Do what exactly? Nioli asked innocently, her violet eyes gleaming with a merry spark. Appearing out of nowhere like a ghost at a harvest festival. Half fairy, half human, she shrugged. Shadows are my element. It would be strange not to use them. She sat down opposite him in a secluded alcove of the palace garden, where almost no one ever looked in, and her half-smile became slightly wider. You know, she said thoughtfully, of all the sisters, I am the only one who knew from the very beginning what would happen with the dragon on the road. Caden blinked in surprise. What do you mean? Fairy visions do not lie, peasant. I saw that meeting long before you threw your famous turnip. So you knew that I would become the chosen savior? I knew that someone would become him. I did not know exactly that it would be you, with your specific talent for throwing root vegetables. She smirked. Fate loves irony more than we think. Caden frowned, pondering her words. And do you know how all this will end? Whom I will choose. Nioli was silent for a long time, looking at him with her violet eyes, in which the reflections of the evening garden's shadows danced. Visions show possibilities, not certainty, she said at last. The future changes every time you make a choice, even the smallest one. Even now, talking to me, you are changing what could have happened. That is comforting and frightening at the same time. Welcome to the world of fairy prophecies, Nioli smirked. By the way, she leaned a little closer, lowering her voice. Have you already realized that my father is hiding the true reason why the law demands your marriage specifically now? Caden tensed. What do you mean? Nioli looked around as if checking whether someone from the shadows was eavesdropping, and her voice became quieter. The dragon you drove away with a turnip was not a wild animal that accidentally flew onto the road. It was sent deliberately. Someone wants to weaken the imperial family from within by creating chaos of succession. And marriage to a peasant marked by the ancient magic of salvation is the only way father found to bypass the conspiracy. Caden felt everything inside him grow colder, even more than in Atlantis' ice garden. A conspiracy? Who is behind this? Nioli leaned back, her half-smile disappearing for a moment, replaced by something more serious and wary. I do not know for sure yet. The visions are fragmentary. But I know one thing. You will need not only to choose a bride peasant, you will need to survive long enough to make that choice at all. A heavy silence hung in the garden air, sharply contrasting with the lightness of their previous conversation. "Why are you telling me this?" Caden asked quietly. Neoli looked at him with a long, studying gaze. "Because of all the contenders I have seen in my dreams over many years, you are the first who truly deserves a chance to survive, long enough to learn the truth." With these words, she rose and dissolved into the shadows of the corridor again, leaving Caden sitting alone with the heavy burden of new information and the growing realization that his story was not just a light rom-com between a turnip and 5 princesses at all. Somewhere beyond the palace walls in the dark corridors of power, forces were already beginning to move, intending to test what a simple peasant, who had suddenly become the most important person in the fate of an entire empire, was truly worth. But that is already a completely different, far more tense part of the story. The feast in honor of the first week of matchmaking, as the Lord Chamberlain solemnly christened it, began quite ordinarily. Jugglers, minstrels, a mountain of roasted game, and Caden desperately trying to remember which of the 17 kinds of bows was supposed to be used during a toast to the health of the 5th princess, and not the 3rd. "Just nod," Findril whispered in his ear, his eyelid already habitually trembling. "A nod is universal and offends no one. And if I nod in the wrong direction? Then may the gods protect us all." Caden nodded. Overall, nothing exploded, which he already considered a small personal victory. Veldor III rose from the throne to make a toast, with a hand still trembling slightly after the dragon's shaking, but with a voice full of his usual royal confidence. "To our chosen savior," he proclaimed, raising his goblet. "May his path to the throne be." He did not manage to finish. The goblet slipped from his fingers not because his hand trembled, but because a second before that Neoli shadow color sitting at her father's right hand knocked it away with a sharp, almost imperceptible movement. The wine splashed onto the white tablecloth, and the tablecloth hissed, smoked, began to blacken, as if it had been poured with acid. The hall gasped. "Poisoned," Neili said quietly, and there was not a trace of her usual half-smile in her violet eyes. Someone mixed black moonwort extract directly into the Emperor's goblet. The throne hall exploded into panic instantly. Courtiers jumped up, guards grabbed their swords, someone shouted "murderer," someone "conspiracy," and the Lord Chamberlain tried at the same time to calm everyone down and faint. Dargit reacted first. Literally in a fraction of a second, she was on her feet, with both swords drawn, turning her back to the throne, covering her father with herself and at the same time looking around the hall in search of a threat. "Everyone stay where you are," she barked in a voice that overpowered the general hum of panic. And surprisingly, the hall really fell silent for a couple of seconds. Ailantis threw up her hand, and at that very moment a thin wall of ice grew around the imperial table. Not thick, but enough to stop any stray arrow or thrown dagger. Sylvana was already leafing through her spellbook with feverish speed, muttering something under her breath, apparently looking for a suitable diagnostic spell. Morella, usually so sunny and carefree, stood pale with sparks trembling around her clenched fists, ready at any second to unleash fire on anyone who seemed a threat. And Caden simply stood like a post in the middle of all this chaos, feeling like an absolutely useless peasant without a single idea of how he could help here at all. Then he noticed him. A servant in the far corner of the hall, the very one who had been pouring wine at the imperial table, who was moving too calmly, too purposefully toward the side door, while all eyes were fixed on the throne. "Stop!" Caden shouted, breaking into a run. He ran not like a warrior, clumsily, broadly, tripping over the own hems of his ceremonial doublet, but he got there faster than anyone had time to react and slammed into the servant with all his weight at the exact moment when the servant was pulling a short throwing knife from his sleeve. Both rolled across the floor. The knife slipped out and flew aside with a ring. "Hold him!" Caden yelled, pressing the writhing servant to the marble slabs with all his not very impressive but stubborn peasant weight. Dargit was beside him in 2 seconds, pressing a sword to the prisoner's throat with the professional decisiveness of a person for whom twisting murderers at official receptions was not the first time. "Good work, peasant," she said, not taking her eyes off the prisoner. "Unexpectedly good." "Pitchforks," Caden exhaled, still lying on the floor on top of the writhing servant. "I told you, an underestimated weapon. And also, as it turns out, a full-body tackle is underestimated too." Dargit snorted, this time with sincere, undisguised respect. The prisoner, a skinny, middle-aged man named Jarek, as it turned out from the servant's documents, was locked in the palace dungeon until morning, under reinforced guard from Dargit's personal guard. The council gathered in the small hall immediately after the commotion in the throne hall had been somehow settled, and the frightened guests had been delicately escorted away with promises of a full investigation and strict security measures. Around the round table sat Veldor III himself, still a little pale, Findril with his unchanged scroll, all 5 princesses and not quite according to protocol, but no one dared throw him out, Caden. The servant confessed that he did not act alone, Dargit reported gloomily, entering the hall last and slamming the door behind her. He received orders through an intermediary. He did not see the intermediary's face, only heard a voice through a magical communication artifact. Whose order? The Emperor asked sharply. Jarek claims that he does not know, but he mentioned one detail. Dargit placed a small medallion on the table, taken from the prisoner's neck. The symbol on the medallion. Sylvana took the medallion carefully as if it could bite, and held it up to the light of the magical lamp. Her eyes widened. This is the coat of arms of House Ravenrock, she said quietly. A northern duchy, formally sworn to the crown, but historically dissatisfied with the loss of part of its territories after the war with Irnaria 50 years ago. Duke Morvain, Ailantis said through her teeth, and the temperature in the room noticeably dropped by a couple of degrees from the mere mention of that name. He has long thirsted for greater influence at court, and he has a daughter of marriageable age. So, Caden said slowly, trying to arrange everything in his head. Someone wants to kill the Emperor, blame it on the chaos around my choice of bride, and then push their own candidacy for the throne through their own daughter? Everyone looked at him with some surprise. Unexpectedly precise analysis for a turnip-throwing peasant, Nioli noted with a slight smirk, though without the former lightness in her voice. Well, in our village, we also have our own intrigues sometimes. Caden shrugged. Elder Gunter tried for 3 years to marry me to the miller's daughter in order to unite our land plots. The scheme is roughly the same, just on a smaller scale, and instead of poison, there was matchmaking through my aunt. Veldor III tiredly rubbed the bridge of his nose. Morven cannot formally be proven anything directly from one servant's medallion. He is smart, cautious, and he has enough influence to wriggle out of direct accusations. Then we need more reliable evidence, Dargit declared, crossing her arms over her chest. Or, Niley said quietly, and all eyes turned to her, we need to let him think that his plan is still working while we gather enough to corner him completely. So use myself as live bait, Caden clarified with not the most enthusiastic expression on his face. In general, yes, Nioli nodded imperturbably. Wonderful. Simply wonderful. What happened next, Caden never expected to see in his life. 5 princesses, each with her own character, magic, and ambitions, united in one evening into something resembling a coordinated team, planning how to protect the clumsy peasant to whom, for different reasons, each of them had already become a little attached. I will take responsibility for reinforced security of the castle perimeter, Dargit declared, unfolding a map of the palace gardens on the table. My blades will take shifts on duty, unnoticed by outside eyes. I will set ice signal barriers on all secondary entrances, Ailantis added. Any unauthorized magical intrusion will instantly raise the alarm. And I, Morella declared with a determined gleam in her eyes, will prepare several special pies with a surprise for Morvain's guards if he appears in the palace again. A little fire magic in the dough and his people will forget about treacherous plans for a long time while dealing with heartburn. Mirella, that is inhumane, Sylvana noted gently, though with obvious difficulty holding back a smile. But effective. I will search the archives for direct connections between Morvain and past attempts on the throne, Sylvana continued more seriously. If this is not his first attempt, surely some traces remain in the old records of the Chancery. And I, Nioli said quietly, will try to see possible variants of his next move through visions. They may be imprecise, but at least some direction is better than complete blindness. Caden listened to all this, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Guilt for putting everyone in danger by the mere fact of his existence, gratitude that they had decided to help him at all, and a slight but persistent surprise at how naturally the 5 princesses, who only a week ago had openly competed for his favor or demonstratively ignored it, now worked together like a well-tuned mechanism. "And what should I do?" he asked when all the plans had been more or less laid out. 5 pairs of eyes turned to him at the same time. "You," Dargit said with unexpected firmness, "will stay close to one of us constantly. No playing hero alone, no throwing yourself under assassins' knives with bare hands like tonight, no matter how brave it may seem." That was a perfectly thought-out plan. Caden tried to object. That was pure luck, she cut him off, but warm notes sounded in her voice. "Although, I admit, brave luck. Besides," Sylvana added, "you should begin studying at least basic self-defense magic. You have hidden magical potential. The chosen savior cannot not have at least some spark of magic inside. I could practice with you in my free time." "Me? Magic?" Caden was sincerely surprised. "I know how to throw turnips, and even then not always accurately." "That is precisely why you need to train," Ilantis snorted almost kindly. "Although I must admit, throwing a turnip into a dragon's eye is quite a non-standard manifestation of hidden magical talent." Caden felt himself blush from this unexpected, almost friendly atmosphere that surrounded him for the first time since his arrival at the palace. "Thank you," he said quietly, looking around at all 5 of them. "Really, I did not expect this." "Do not thank us ahead of time, peasant." Neoli smirked, but sincere warmth could be read in her violet eyes. "Morvain has only begun the game. It will get harder from here." She turned out to be right much faster than any of them could have supposed. The first magic lesson with Sylvana took place not in the library, but in a secluded part of the palace garden, away from outside eyes and, importantly, from flammable objects, considering Morella's sad experience with baking. "Close your eyes," Sylvana said quietly, standing opposite him with an open spellbook in her hands. "Try to feel the warmth inside yourself. Not physical, magical." Caden honestly tried. He closed his eyes, concentrated, imagined warmth, and felt only rumbling in his stomach. Because he had missed lunch because of all this commotion with the assassination attempt. "I feel nothing except hunger," he admitted honestly. Sylvana laughed softly. "Try again. Perhaps remember a moment when you protected someone important. Savior magic often awakens through strong emotions connected with protecting others." Caden closed his eyes again, this time remembering last night. The moment when he had rushed at the servant with the knife without thinking for a second about the danger, driven only by an instinctive desire to protect the Emperor, protect the princesses, protect this unexpected, strange, but already almost dear place. And suddenly he felt it. A weak, barely perceptible warmth somewhere in his chest, flaring up with every second of concentration. "Am I doing it?" he asked hopefully without opening his eyes. "You are," Sylvana quietly confirmed, and genuine surprise sounded in her voice. "Open your eyes, only slowly." Caden opened his eyes and saw that his palms were softly glowing with golden light, exactly the same as the pages of Sylvana's book had glowed during their first meeting in the library. "Wow," he breathed. "Wow," Sylvana repeated like an echo, coming closer to examine the glow more attentively. "This is protective magic. A rare ancient school that almost no one practices now." According to legends, this was the very magic possessed by the ancient saviors of the throne, who are mentioned in the oldest manuscripts. "So, I am not just a peasant who accidentally threw a lucky turnip?" "It seems not." She raised her gaze to him, and a slight blush appeared on her cheeks. "It seems fate truly chose you not by accident." They stood very close to each other, and the golden glow around Kaiden's palms gradually enveloped the space between them in a soft, warm cocoon, while Sylvana, for some reason, did not step back, although she usually kept a small, polite distance. "Sylvana, Caden began, not really knowing himself what he was going to say next, but feeling his heart pounding somewhere in his throat. He did not manage to finish because at that very moment from behind the nearest bushes with a deafening boom, a column of smoke and fire flew up, followed by Morella, sooty but imperturbably smiling. "Oops," she said, shaking smoldering sparks from her dress. "It seems I slightly overdid the signal fire traps for Morvain's guard." The magical glow between Caden and Sylvana instantly scattered. Both jumped away from each other with equally embarrassed faces, and Sylvana hastily buried herself back in the spellbook, as if nothing had been happening a second ago. "Mirella," she groaned. You have absolutely terrible timing. But an excellent sense of humor, Morella replied cheerfully, not embarrassed in the slightest. Oh, by the way, what did I miss? Something interesting was clearly happening here. Nothing, Caden said quickly, feeling himself blush to the tips of his ears. Definitely nothing, Silvana confirmed in the same tone, examining her book far too diligently. Morella shifted her gaze from one to the other with the slyest smile she was capable of, and Caden understood that now the whole palace would learn about the happened, or rather, almost happened, moment in a couple of hours at most, considering the speed of palace gossip. Late in the evening, when most of the castle had already sunk into sleep, Silvana continued digging through the old archives of the Chancery, searching for connections between House Raven Rock and past conspiracies against the throne. Caden, unable to fall asleep because of the day's overflowing events, the assassination attempt, the strange magical awakening, the almost kiss amid golden glow, wandered into the library, partly in the hope of seeing Silvana again, partly simply because the library had become the only place in the palace where he felt relatively calm. "Cannot sleep?" Silvana asked, without raising her gaze from another dusty scroll. "My head is too busy," Caden admitted, sitting down opposite her at the long table piled with old documents. "Found anything?" Silvana froze for a moment and then slowly turned one of the scrolls toward him, an old contract yellowed with time, with the seal of House Raven Rock. 50 years ago, during the War for the Northern Territories, she said quietly, the previous Duke of Raven Rock, the father of the current Morvain, tried to organize a similar conspiracy against our father's great-grandfather. Back then, the plan was also built on marriage. The Duke wanted to marry his daughter to the Crown Prince through an artificially created succession crisis. And what happened? The conspiracy was exposed, but the Duke was not executed, only deprived of part of his lands, and strict restrictions were imposed on the military power of the duchy. The Emperor then considered the death penalty too radical a measure for preserving the political balance in the north. So Morvain is simply continuing a family tradition, only in a more sophisticated way, Caden summed up gloomily. It seems so. Silvana put the scroll aside and rubbed her tired eyes. And what is worse, there is mention of a certain magical artifact, the Shard of Shadow, which the former Duke tried to use to strengthen his claims. The artifact was never found after that conspiracy was suppressed. Do you think Morvain is now trying to find it again? I do not know, Silvana admitted honestly. But if he gains access to ancient dark magic, in addition to political ambitions, it will be much more dangerous than simple poisoned wine. They fell silent, pondering this unpleasant prospect, and the silence of the library was disturbed only by the quiet crackling of magical candles. You know, Caden said quietly after a pause. Before all this story, I thought that the biggest problem in my life was the neighbor's goat that eats my cabbage every summer. Silvana involuntarily smiled. And now I think the goat was not such a bad problem compared to ducal conspiracies and ancient dark artifacts. Do you miss simple life? She asked with unexpected seriousness in her voice. Caden truly thought about this question for the first time in the last few days. Sometimes, he admitted honestly, but he looked at her at the golden light of the magical candles reflected in her green eyes. There are things here for which it seems it was worth going through all this commotion. Silvana blushed slightly and hastily turned her gaze back to the scrolls, but the corners of her lips trembled in a barely noticeable but sincere smile. The royal hunt had always been considered a noble, almost sacred event. In Irnaria, people put on their best clothes for it, spoke especially beautifully, pretended that they loved nature, and carefully concealed that in reality most aristocrats were more afraid of their own horses than of any forest beasts. Caden understood this in the very first hour, when he was put into the saddle and told to sit straight, as if he were not a village guy who had spent most of his life riding on a cart with sacks of potatoes, but a lord of elder blood. The horse under him was beautiful, white, too intelligent, and clearly disapproved of its new rider. He is looking at me as if he knows I am unworthy, Caden muttered. That is because you really do not know how to sit in the saddle, Dargit noted calmly, riding beside him on a black war stallion, which, unlike the imperial horse, looked as if it respected her in every way. Very encouraging, thank you. Dargit cast him a quick look. You are holding yourself better than half the courtiers? Do not complain. Half the courtiers probably cannot sit at all without a cushion. Exactly. The hunting party moved through the golden autumn forest toward the royal grounds north of the capital. Ahead rode Emperor Veldor III with his two closest advisors, guards on the sides, and slightly behind. In groups, the princesses kept close. Sylvana looked as if she had already mentally quarreled with all the hunters because they made noise and broke branches. Ailantis rode with the composure of a snow statue. Morella kept trying to jump down from the saddle to touch every beautiful mushroom she noticed along the way. Nioli, as always, seemed slightly absent, as if she was listening not to the forest, but to some other more dangerous voices. Caden, meanwhile, tried not to fall off the horse and not die of shame. And then he felt it. Something wrong. The forest suddenly became too quiet. Not naturally quiet. Not the way it is before rain or at dawn, but quiet like it is when a predator has hidden nearby and even the birds have understood it. Caden tensed. Morella also noticed something first. The sparks around her fingers flared brighter. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. Ailantis raised her head. Magic. Sylvana quickly opened the spellbook, hanging at her side in a special protective case. Dark, low, but very dense. Dargit was already drawing her sword. Ambush. At that very moment, the ground ahead exploded. Black smoke burst out from under the roots of an old oak, and from it, as if from an open wound in the world itself, hooded figures crawled out. Not people. Almost. Two pale faces, two long fingers, eyes in which not life was reflected, but dull black magic. "Shadow servants," Niole said sharply, and not without reason. "This is a trap for you, Caden." One of the figures threw up its hand. A black sickle of energy flew toward Caden. The horse under him reared. Caden nearly flew out of the saddle, but at the last moment clutched the mane, and the strike passed by, cutting through the air and severing a tree branch, which crashed to the ground with a crack. "Thank you, horse," he exhaled. The horse looked at him with such an expression as if help had not been included in its voluntary program, and immediately dashed to the side. "Hey, not now!" "Hold on," Dargit shouted, having already cut one of the attackers in half. But there were more enemies. New and new shadows crawled out of the forest, and after a second it became clear. This was not an ordinary raid. These are not Morvaine's mercenaries. This is something ancient and far more dangerous. Something connected with the Shard of Shadow which Sylvana had spoken about last night. "They feed on fear," she shouted, quickly leafing through the pages. "Do not let them come close." "Wonderful," Caden snapped, pushing away with his foot one of the shadow servants that had climbed straight toward his horse. "I already have plenty of fear, enough for a whole army." The situation looked disgusting. The Imperial hunt had turned into a slaughter in a matter of seconds. The guards held the perimeter, but shadows seeped between them like smoke through cracks in a window. Dargit fought hand to hand. Ailantis froze the approaches to the trees. Sylvana blinded the shadow creatures with light seals. Morella set fire to everything that moved too suspiciously, and Nioli disappeared and emerged from the shadows, striking enemies from the side where they did not expect her. Caden, meanwhile, ended up in the very center of the chaos. And in this chaos, he finally did what would later become a strange pride for him. He stopped thinking that he was useless. One of the shadow servants rushed straight at him. Caden, without hesitation, pulled from behind the saddle the hunting knife that had been given to him just in case and struck the enemy's wrist. Not fatally, just to break the tempo. Then he sharply jumped from the saddle, rolled across the ground, and picked up the fallen spear of a killed guardsman. "All right, come on." He nodded to himself as if persuading himself not to be afraid. "I did not come here just for decoration." The next enemy attacked from behind. Caden did not see him but felt movement in the air. Pure village habit. If something nearby is too quiet, then it is dangerous. He sharply crouched, and the shadow whistled over his head, after which it flew straight into the ice-covered trunk, frozen by Ailantis. "Not bad," the princess said coldly without looking at him. "Continue in the same spirit. Thank you for the moral support." Do not confuse that with praise, but Caden had already understood the main thing. He did not have to be stronger than everyone. It was enough to be useful. He grabbed a fallen shield and rushed to the edge of the clearing, where two guards had cornered an enemy magical servant, but could not approach because of the black smoke bursting from his hands. "Left!" Caden shouted, and he himself did not know where this confidence in his voice suddenly came from. "He is holding the center. Go around on the right." The guards obeyed automatically, and the trap fell apart. The shadow servant lost position. Morella threw a fireball at him, Sylvana immediately fixed him with a light seal, and Dargit finally ended everything with one heavy sword strike. "You are commanding," Atlantis noted, passing by. Caden blinked. "Me?" "Yes, not bad for a peasant." "Is that a compliment?" Do not get used to it. He had only just managed to smirk when the forest ahead trembled again. A new silhouette appeared from the depths of the thicket. A tall man in a dark cloak, with a silver mask on his face. Morvain. Or more precisely, his closest agent. "Finally," Nioli said quietly as if greeting an old acquaintance. A real player. The silver mask slowly turned toward them. "Chosen savior," Morvain's agent pronounced in a voice that sounded as if he was speaking through something very cold. "The legacy of Ernaria and a joke of fate." Caden tightened his grip on the spear. "Listen, if you are here to deliver an ominous speech, can you at least make it shorter? My back is already hurting." Dargit almost snorted, but held back. The mask turned toward him. "You do not understand what you are involved in. I was growing turnips until yesterday." "All the more so." The silver agent raised his hand. 3 more cloaked figures came out from behind the trees. Sylvana turned pale. "These are not just servants. They are bearers of fragments of the Shard of Shadow." "And what does that mean?" Atlantis asked shortly. Sylvana turned a page. Quickly, nervously. "It means they can grow stronger from the fear of those around them. The stronger the panic, the stronger they become." Caden looked at his companions. He himself had enough panic for a small city. "Excellent. Simply excellent." Morvain's agent took a step forward. "The Shard of Shadow is an ancient artifact that once belonged to the old rulers of the North. It distorts the will, strengthens fear, and brings the bearer closer to the dark side of the world. Now, Duke Morvain wants to return what was stolen from his bloodline." "Stolen?" Atlantis snorted. "Your master started a war, was punished, and stripped of his rights. That is called consequences, not theft. History is written by the victors, Princess of Ice. Yes? Then try saying that again when I turn your mask into a snowdrift." The agent did not react. He looked only at Caden. "You must choose one of them," he said. "Otherwise the throne will not accept you, and Ernaria will collapse into disintegration. Morvain offers a deal." "Strike me first," Caden muttered, "and then offer deals." The agent slightly tilted his head. "He offers you a way to avoid unnecessary blood. Choose the Duke's daughter. Accept the support of House Ravenrock. In return, Morvain will recognize you as Emperor." At that moment, all 5 princesses looked at him at the same time. Caden felt something worse than fear crawl down his back. "Oh no," he whispered. "Now I really do not like this trip at all." Dargit raised her sword. "Do not listen to him." Morella flared with sparks. "He is lying." Sylvana clutched the spellbook. "This is obviously a political trap." Atlantis coldly added, "You will not become that lord's tool." Nioli silently looked at Morvain's agent, and for the first time in a long while there was no smile in her eyes, only calculation. Caden swallowed. "I understood that even without you." The agent slowly stretched out his hand. "Then you will die." The first strike was magical. A black wave from under the ground rushed toward them, breaking roots, smashing stones, making the horses neigh in panic and bolt from their places. One of the guards fell, clutching his head, as if a hammer had struck his skull. Sylvana shouted a protective formula, and a golden dome covered Caden, Dargit, and herself for a second. The dome trembled. Morella immediately sent a fiery mass into the nearest bearer of the shard, but instead of flying away, he only screamed, and a dark aura flared around him, devouring the flame. "They are getting stronger," she shouted. "More fear, more power." "Then stop shouting," Caden said through his teeth, while feverishly thinking at the same time. He was not a strategist, not a mage, not a prince. But he knew how to look at a problem the way peasants look at it. Not at the beautiful theory, but at what actually works. If they feed on fear, then they must not be allowed to control the battlefield. If they feed on panic, then someone is needed who will keep everyone from panicking. And then he understood what he had to do. "Listen to me!" He shouted so loudly that even Morvain's agent froze for a second. "No one dies, no one panics. If someone screams in terror, I will personally make him wash the stables with his bare hands." It was so absurd that even the guards, who were already beginning to fall into despair, involuntarily blinked. And then someone, it seemed Morella, giggled, and that was enough. Fear cracked. Morvain's agent sharply turned to him. "You are a fool." "Possibly," Caden agreed, "but a very useful fool." He rushed forward straight at the bearer of the shard and struck him with the spear not in the body, but into the ground beside him, knocking the soil out from under his feet and destroying the magical pattern he had managed to draw. Sylvana immediately closed the light seal. Ailantis created an ice frame around the enemy's legs. Dargit burst into close combat with two swords, moving so fast that even Caden did not manage to notice her full route. Morella set another bearer's cloak on fire and he screamed, losing concentration. Nioli vanished into the shadow of a tree and appeared directly behind Morvain's agent, striking him on the wrist with such precision that he dropped the conduit artifact. Caden saw it. Sylvana, the artifact. She understood without unnecessary words. With one hand she raised the book, with the other she struck the fallen fragment with a light spell. The artifact cracked, and in that moment everything changed. The shadows around them trembled as if their connection to the source had weakened. The creatures hissed, lost strength, and one after another began to fall apart into smoke. Morvain's agent took a step back for the first time in the entire fight. "No." "Oh yes," Caden exhaled, feeling adrenaline ringing in his ears. "Now I am starting to like what is happening." Dargit, breathing heavily, lowered one sword. "Do not relax, he has not left yet." And she was right. Morvain's agent, already without his former confidence, suddenly threw a small black sphere into the ground. A flash of darkness, smoke, screams. When visibility cleared, there was already no one in the agent's place. "He left," Ailantis said gloomily. "No," Nioli answered quietly, narrowing her eyes. "He simply informed Morvain that you are now an official problem, Caden." Caden sat down right on the grass. Wonderful. Simply perfect. Now I am officially being threatened too. Morella ran up to him and, to his complete horror, hugged him tightly. "You were amazing." "I was extremely frightened," he muttered, not knowing where to put his hands. "That was amazing too." Sylvana sat down beside him, adjusting her slipped glasses. "You not only did not panic, you also held everyone else together. That is quite unusual." "It was a cry from the soul and a threat with stables," Caden admitted. "Honestly, I myself did not expect it to work." Ailantis turned away, but softness sounded in her voice for the first time. Sometimes the roughest methods turn out to be the most effective. Dargit went down on one knee beside him and held out her hand. "Get up, future Emperor. We still have work." Caden took her hand and rose. And for a second, in the eyes of all 5 princesses, he saw one and the same expression. Not only respect, possessiveness. Not in a bad sense. Rather a strange, emerging attachment to a person who had just, while being a terrified peasant, managed not to fall apart under pressure and even save them all from a magical nightmare. They returned to the castle already at sunset. The hunt was disrupted. Several guards were wounded, 3 horses had died, 2 hunting fires had been burned by dark magic down to black earth, and half the courtiers were now in a state as if they had personally seen the end of the world. Caden rode silently, almost deafened by what had happened. His head was still buzzing from the fight. His hands were shaking, his heart was beating too fast. But what troubled him most was not that. He could not stop thinking about how easily Morvain, or his agent, had spoken of choosing a bride as something politically cold and inevitable, as if he were not a person, as if the princesses were pieces on a board, as if Caden himself were just a tool. And then he looked at the princesses riding ahead and on the sides of his horse. Ailantis, sitting straight in the saddle, icy, but unexpectedly caring when it came to protecting others. Morella still excited, but already trying to joke again to ease the tension. Sylvana thinking not only about magic, but also about how to keep all this from falling apart. Dargit, strong, straightforward, reliable to the point of roughness. Nioli, misty and perceptive, seeing more than she said. 5 different lives, 5 different paths, and he was truly expected to choose one. No way out, no magic that would solve everything for him. No running back to the village because now he was already being watched, and not only by Morvain. He was needed. By the Empire, by the Emperor, by the princesses, by the conspirators, by magic. And all of it at the same time seemed too big for a person who yesterday had still thought only about cabbage and a goat. "What are you thinking about?" Sylvana asked quietly, riding closer. Caden smirked without joy. "About how my life has very quickly turned into something no one prepared me for." Get used to it, Ailantis said calmly, without turning around. Heirs and saviors rarely receive normal preparation. I am not an heir at all, Caden muttered. Not yet, Nioli noted softly from the darkness slightly behind. Caden sighed. Thank you, that is encouraging. Morella leaned toward him from the other side and smiled, trying to make it light and warm. But you already know how to do one important thing. What? You make all of us hold together. Caden wanted to answer something, but did not have time. Behind them, far in the forest, a second impact thundered, no longer magical. Dull, stone-like. Sylvana sharply turned around. That was not the fight. That was a diversion. Dargit instantly straightened. What? Nioli turned pale and her voice became almost a whisper. Morvain did not attack us for victory. He wanted to buy time. Ailantis sharply turned her head. For what? Nioli looked ahead toward the castle, and for the first time all this time her face lost its usual mystery. To begin an attack on the palace. Caden felt cold run down his back. Wait, he said slowly. Do you mean that while we were fighting back here in the forest, another attack is already happening in the palace? Nioli nodded. If my gift does not lie, yes. And in the distance, above the towers of Urnarian Castle, a black column of smoke slowly rose. When they returned, the gates were already open. Not in the peaceful sense. In confusion, in alarm, in panic. Guards were rushing around the courtyard. Maids were dragging buckets of water, and several guard mages were trying to hold back the flame that had already spread across the western wing of the palace. Morvain! One of the officers shouted, noticing the Imperial hunting party. Inside! The strike came from inside. Caden jumped from the horse without even waiting for it to fully stop. What about the Emperor? Safe, but part of the northern corridor is destroyed. And the officer stumbled, seeing all 5 princesses at once and 2 advisors are missing. Dargit swore. Ailantis was already building an ice shield over the entrance, where the flames were raging. Sylvana quickly read a spell to stabilize the structure of the building. Morella snatched a bucket of water from one of the servants and literally evaporated its contents into steam, which helped extinguish the edge of the fire. Caden rushed into the building together with the guards. Inside it smelled of burning and ozone. The corridors were full of cracks. Somewhere there were charred tapestries lying around. Somewhere on the floor lay a broken magical lamp. Caden raced through the passages now familiar to him until he heard a cry. On the staircase between floors lay a young archivist pinned down by a beam fragment. Caden and Dargit pulled him out at the same time. Who did this? Caden asked. The archivist, gasping for breath, pointed with a trembling hand toward the underground archive. They came for the lists, old ones, and for. He did not manage to finish, he lost consciousness. What lists? Sylvana asked sharply, running up after them, and then one thought struck their shared magical hearing. Sylvana turned pale first. It cannot be. What? Morella asked. Sylvana raised her gaze to Caden. The inheritance archives, old records about bloodlines, and, possibly, documents about the origin of the princesses. A terrible silence hung in the air. Caden slowly shifted his gaze to the sisters. Wonderful, he said with tired doom. Simply excellent. Now I have to guard family documents too. Dargit tightened her grip on the sword hilt. Morvain wants not only you, he wants the entire foundation of the throne. Ailantis stood beside them. Then we will stop him here. Nioli looked toward the smoking wing, where shadows were already beginning to move unnaturally. No, she said quietly. We are already one move too late. Caden looked at her. What do you mean? Nioli turned to him, and in her violet eyes there was that dangerous calm that appears in a person who has seen the future one step ahead of the others. Morvain is not stealing documents. He is stealing the right to choose. The palace archive was burning. Not all of it yet, only the lower wing, where copies of old genealogies, dowry lists, marriage contracts, and documents that no one had ever considered truly important were kept until they began disappearing in the fire. Caden stood in the corridor and watched smoke crawl along the stone floor and magical cracks run along the walls. This is not an ordinary fire, Sylvana exhaled, pressing her folio to her chest. The fire is moving along the enchanted lines of the storage. Someone deliberately destroyed the protective contours. Morvain? Dargit asked sharply. Nioli shook her head. Not only him. It was said so quietly that Caden almost did not hear it. He turned to her. What does not only him mean? Nioli looked at the smoking passage with the same calm with which people usually look at rain. Only now that calm was far too cold. It means that Morvain was not the only one who wanted to take the documents. Who else? Nioli did not answer at once. Ailantis was already leading an ice wall along the fire, trying not to let the flame go farther. Morella, pale with rage, was creating an air current around them to drive out the smoke. Below, the shouts of guards and the ringing of metal could be heard. Caden took a step toward Nioli. Answer. She finally looked at him, the one who has been sitting much closer to the throne than Morvain all this time. Caden froze. Sylvana, too. Dargit slowly turned her head. Are you talking about the advisor? I am talking about Lord Chancellor Evren Dalmir, Nioli said, and about the man who is always the first to tell Father what must be done for the sake of stability. The silence became so thick that Caden almost heard his own breathing. Evren Dalmir. Dry, polite, always impeccable, never raising his voice. One of those people no one suspects because they know too well how to be gray and unnoticeable. No, Ailantis said quietly. He has served our family for 20 years. Exactly, Nioli answered. And that is too long for accidental loyalty. Dargit swore sharply. If that is true, we are already losing. No, Caden answered, although everything inside him clenched. We are not losing yet. Just, now everything is worse. Morella ran closer, the tail of her hair completely disheveled from the smoke. Caden, what is happening? He looked at her. At Sylvana, at Dargit, at Ailantis, at Nioli. 5 princesses, 5 different roads. And now each of them could be a target. Someone from inside the court, he said slowly. Not only Morvain. And if they got to the archives, it means they are looking for something that can change the very law of my choice. Sylvana turned even paler. You mean? Yes, Nioli interrupted. Genealogies. The true bloodline of the imperial house? Caden frowned. And what does that mean? Sylvana slowly shifted her gaze to him. It means that your right to the throne may not depend on marriage to one of the sisters. Silence. Wait, Caden said. Is that good or bad? Ailantis closed her eyes for a second. Usually such things in Nernaria mean war. They found the surviving cache only 2 hours later, when the main fire had already been partially extinguished, and the archivist had knelt before the ruins as before a grave. Sylvana found a hidden slab in the floor behind a burned shelf. Beneath it was a narrow niche, protected by an ancient blood enchantment. The one who had placed the seal clearly had not expected it to be opened in panic in the middle of a palace fire. Give me a minute, Sylvana said, lowering herself to one knee. She took chalk, silver thread, and a small crystal of light from her bag. Caden watched as she drew careful symbols over the worn rune. Did you know all this? He whispered. I knew that the archives were hiding more than they showed, she answered without being distracted. Ancient genealogies are always hidden in places like this. Usually marriage contracts, lists of heirs, and things because of which people then cut each other up for 3 generations end up there too. Excellent. Reassuring. You asked about palace history, she noted dryly. So it came to you. Click. The slab opened. Inside lay 3 things. The first, a thin leather binding with the coat of arms of the imperial house. The second, a letter sealed with wax. The third, a small silver amulet in the shape of the sun and moon woven together. Caden reached for the amulet first. As soon as his fingers touched the metal, warmth ran over his skin, very familiar and strangely calming. Ailantis sharply drew in air. This is the imperial sign of the ancient line, Sylvana finished in a strained voice. The symbol that the bearer is connected to the first dynasty before the reform of succession. Dargit frowned. I have never seen it. Because it was considered lost, Sylvana said quietly. After the last great troubles, it was hidden, according to legend, so that no one would use it as proof of true right to the throne. Caden shifted his gaze to the letter. And this? Nioli took it first, although she did not even touch the seal. A letter from the late Empress Ardessa, she said, Veldor's mother. Caden blinked. From whom? From the woman who in her time saved the dynasty from civil war, Ailantis answered, and, apparently, decided to leave one final safeguard. Sylvana carefully removed the seal, unfolded the sheet. The letter was short, but after the first lines, no one spoke anymore. If this amulet has been found, it means the archives have been opened and the time has come. My son and daughters must know. The law of marriage to the chosen savior was created not only for the sake of peace. It was part of an old agreement between bloodlines that preserved the stability of the empire after the ancient catastrophe. The savior is not obliged to choose for love. He is obliged to awaken the lawful balance joined in the 5 branches of the dynasty. Only the one who touches the amulet and is accepted by its light is capable of confirming his right to become the lawful guardian of the throne. But there is something I could not say while alive. One of the chancellors knew that the 5th branch of the dynasty had not been cut off. It is hidden. And if the truth comes out, the old law of choosing a bride may lose force. If this letter is being read by my grandchildren or by someone who has found himself in this knot of fate, remember, the throne stands not on the one who was chosen, but on the one who was managed to be preserved, Ardessa. Sylvana slowly lowered the letter. The 5th branch of the dynasty, she whispered. What does that mean? Caden asked. Nioli looked at the amulet with that very expression that appeared on her, only when the future became too dangerous. It means that the law of marriage may have been built on an old lie. Dargit straightened. Explain. Ailantis answered instead of her. If there truly is a hidden 5th branch of blood in the imperial line, then one of us may be not just a princess, or not who she claims to be at all. Caden slowly shifted his gaze between them. Wait, you mean to say? I mean to say, Nioli answered quietly, that Morvain is not hunting precisely now by accident. He knows about the ancient law, and he knows that if this branch surfaces, the entire mechanism of his conspiracy will break. Morella turned pale. So one of us. Sylvana clutched the letter. May not be Veldor's daughter in the full sense of blood. Morella blinked. Dargit frowned. Ailantis remained motionless, but an icy light of magic clearly appeared on her cheekbones. Caden looked at them and felt the familiar world crumble. And you all knew this? He asked quietly. Nioli looked away first. Suspected. The visions had been strange for a long time. Sylvana shook her head. I had archival inconsistencies, but I did not want to believe it until I found a proof. Dargit said through her teeth, and I simply wanted at least one thing in life to be straightforward. Ailantis clenched and unclenched her fingers. I knew there was something strange in me, but I did not think it was that much. Morella looked at everyone in turn. Is this bad? Caden did not answer at once. He suddenly realized that he was now standing before not just a political crisis, before something very personal, before something that could change how each of them saw herself. I do not know, he said honestly, but I know that you are all still you. Whatever may be there in the genealogies. Morella looked at him with such gratitude as if he had just saved not the palace, but her heart. Sylvana smiled quietly. Dargit turned away to hide the unexpected softness on her face. Ailantis closed her eyes for a second, and Nioli, for the first time in a long while, did not smile at all. Only said very quietly, This will not end here. The news spread faster than smoke. By evening, half the palace was already whispering about the burned archive, the missing papers, and the strange amulet found in the old empress's cache. No one knew the exact contents of the letter, but rumors lived their own life. Some spoke of a hidden heiress, some of false blood, some of an ancient curse. It seemed to Caden that the corridors had become colder, and it was not Ailantis' magic. Everything around had simply changed. Dargit kept distant. Not rudely, but clearly collected, tense. She did not look at Caden as directly as before. Morella, on the contrary, tried to joke even more than usual, but now uncertainty sometimes sounded in her laughter. Sylvana went to the library and almost did not leave it, except for tea and books. Nioli vanished into the shadows more often than usual. Ailantis became even colder, and Caden could not understand whether it was protection or distance. He found her in the evening in the winter garden. The ice on the roses shone faintly under the moonlight. Did you know? He asked without preamble. Ailantis did not turn around. Partly, and you kept silent. You also kept silent about being an ordinary peasant until you ended up here? She answered dryly. Caden was silent for a moment. That is not the same, no? She finally turned around. Then what is it? Each of us has our own secrets. Yours just happened in a village and ours in blood. He sighed. I did not want to hurt anyone, I know. It sounded unexpectedly soft. Caden was surprised. Ailantis lowered her gaze to the ice rose. The problem is not that you did not know something. The problem is that now Morvain can use this against us. Against you? Against everyone. If he proves that one of the sisters has no legal right to be in the line of succession, and then also breaks the agreement, you will be left without support, and the Empire without protection. Caden sat down on the stone bench nearby, so everything is even worse than before. Yes, wonderful. They were silent. Then Ailantis asked quietly, if it turned out that one of us was not the one she thought she was, would that change your choice? The question was too direct, too personal, and Caden understood that she was asking not only about politics. He slowly shook his head. I do not know. Perhaps it would not depend on blood. Ailantis looked at him for a long time, and for the first time all this time there was no coldness in her icy eyes. Only a very tired, restrained human anxiety. That is a good answer, she said quietly. And without adding another word, left the rose garden. It came in the form of an invitation. Duke Morvain officially requested a meeting with Emperor Veldor III the next day, citing urgent matters of court security and succession to the throne. Refusing would be politically dangerous. Accepting was twice as dangerous. In the evening, Caden sat in the small hall, together with the princesses, the Emperor, Findrick, and the 3 best mages of the court. On the table lay the documents from the archive cache, the amulet, and Ardessa's letter. Veldor looked older than before. I hate this day, he finally admitted. And I still have a state to rule. Can you stop being dramatic, at least for a little while? Dargit asked dryly. We have a castle under threat here, not a theater troupe. The Emperor snorted. Sorry, it is a professional habit. Findril, as always, nervously flipped through the papers. If the letter is genuine, he said, then the old decree about choosing a bride can indeed be challenged. But that does not completely cancel the political necessity of marriage. Why? Caden asked. Sylvana answered quietly, because marriage now is not only the right to the throne, it is a way to keep the 5 branches of blood from splitting apart. If one of the princesses turns out to be outside the line, the other 4 will be even more important as a guarantee of stability. Or the opposite, Nioli muttered. Everything may collapse if Morvain achieves recognition of a forgery. There was a knock at the door. 3 times, evenly, too politely. One of the guards opened it. On the threshold stood a servant in Morvain's black livery with a silver tray. A message from the Duke, he said calmly. For His Majesty and for the chosen savior. Dargit rose first. Bring the tray here. The servant raised his head, and in his eyes Caden saw that same empty, dark shimmer he had already seen in the shadow servants in the forest. Too late, the man said. The tray exploded. The explosion was not fiery, magical. The hall was flooded with gray smoke, the walls trembled, and the magical lamps went out all at once. Caden threw himself to the floor, at the same time shielding the amulet and the letter with his body. Nearby, someone screamed. Dargit was already attacking. Sylvana managed to place a protective seal over the Emperor. Morella struck with a flare of fire into the center of the smoke to burn out the hidden attackers. Ailantis froze part of the floor, not allowing the enemies to move quickly. Nioli disappeared. Caden jumped up, coughed, and only then saw that figures in familiar silver masks were coming out of the smoke. Not Morvain alone. His people inside the palace, servants, guards, officials, those who had been nearby for years. Caden felt something inside break off. There it was, the real threat. Not an external duke, not forest creatures, not the amulet, and not ancient magic. People. Those who had been trusted. Take the Emperor away, Dargit shouted. 2 masked men rushed toward Veldor. Caden intercepted one with a spear, throwing him into the wall. The second almost reached the throne, but was met by Ailantis' icy strike. Sylvana, pale and focused, read one protective spell after another, holding part of the hall from complete collapse. Morella burned out half the smoke, but shadows still moved inside it. Caden suddenly saw one of Morvaine's people heading not toward the Emperor, but toward the princesses, toward Nioli. And in that same second, everything slowed down. Nioli turned to him, and Caden understood. She had already seen it. Too late. The shadow leapt. Caden rushed forward, and for the first time in the entire story of his arrival in the palace, he did not think about choice, did not think about the law, did not think about the throne. He thought only that he would not let her fall. Caden did not have time to think. He simply jumped. The shadow in the silver mask rushed toward Nioli, and at that moment Caden crashed into him with his whole body, knocking the trajectory off course. They both fell to the floor, rolled over a piece of a broken chair, and Caden felt cold magic slide over his skin like over wet stone. "Nioli!" he shouted. She was already moving, not in panic, not in shock, but in her usual eerily calm manner, as if she had seen everything happening in advance and was only waiting for a convenient moment to intervene. The shadow in the mask snatched out a short blade. Caden caught the wrist, twisted the arm, and struck an elbow into the throat. The mask cracked, and beneath it flashed a gray, almost lifeless face. Not human, or not entirely human. Too empty a gaze. Too motionless skin. These creatures again. Caden rasped. Nioli appeared from the side and struck the attacker in the neck with a thin silver dagger. He froze and then began to crumble into smoke, as if he had been made from shadow and cloth, not from flesh. Caden rose, breathing heavily. "Are you all right?" Nioli looked at him with that very expression in which there was always a little more understanding than he wanted. "No," she said, "but thank you." Around them, true chaos was already underway. Dargit was holding back 3 masked men at once near the throne, delivering blows with the precision of a blacksmith's hammer. Ailantis created a wall of ice to cut the attackers off from the western corridor. Sylvana held a dome over the Emperor and 2 wounded guards. Morella, already furious, burned out the smoke while fiery sparks danced in her hair. Veldor III, by the way, held up unexpectedly well. He did not scream and did not faint, but stood behind the protective barrier and irritably gripped a staff, which, as it turned out, he also knew how to use in an emergency. "Who let them into the hall?" he barked. "Allow me, your majesty," Findrel shouted, diving under the table. "This is clearly not according to plan." "We had a plan?" the Emperor yelled back. "Theoretically." Caden would have liked to say something witty, but there was no time. One of the attackers was already rushing toward the magical documents on the table. Caden saw this and understood. The target was not people. The target was the amulet, the letter, the genealogies. He grabbed the amulet from the surface of the table, shoved it into his pocket, and rushed to the documents, shielding them with his back. And then everything got worse because Morvain entered the hall. Not alone, of course, he had never liked dirtying his hands. But he entered personally, accompanied by 2 guards and that same agent in the silver mask whom Caden had seen in the forest. The Duke was calm as if he had not come to an armed coup, but to a boring reception with cold wine. "Your Majesty," he said with a deep bow, "I am sorry that everything has gone this far." "So am I," Veldor muttered, "especially considering that you arranged it." Morvain smiled slightly. "I am only trying to prevent a catastrophe." "You call your own coup a catastrophe?" Dargit asked, without even turning around. "I call a catastrophe a situation in which the lawful line of the throne collapses because of a hidden error in the inheritance." Caden froze. The word struck him like cold water. Morvain noticed it and slowly turned to him. You already know." Nioli tensed. "Do not dare." Morvain folded his hands behind his back. "Your dear sister is very observant, almost as much as you, Caden, but she did not tell you the main thing." Sylvana sharply shouted, "Do not listen to him." "Too late." Caden already felt a dry, cold lump rising in his throat. "What do you mean?" he asked. Morvain slightly bowed his head. That the 5th branch of the royal house was not merely hidden, it was taken away, and hidden in you. Such silence fell in the hall that the magical lights above the throne could be heard crackling. Caden slowly blinked. "What?" Morvain smirked. "You are not just a peasant. You are the bearer of the lost blood of the 5th branch." "Lie," Ailantis said sharply. But she said it too quickly. Caden noticed. So did Morvain. "Oh," the Duke said quietly. So they did not tell you. How interesting. Nioli took a step forward. Caden, do not believe him. I am not asking you to believe, Morvain said calmly. I am suggesting you remember why your mother disappeared from all palace chronicles. Why the child was not given up to be raised but hidden. Why the law of marriage to a princess was created specifically around you. Sylvana turned even whiter. That is impossible. It is possible, Morvain answered, and I have proof. He took out a thin folder. One of the masked men handed it forward. Caden looked at the document as if at a poisonous snake. Do not take it, Dargit said sharply. There is no need, Morvain answered with a cold smile. I will read it aloud. He opened the folder and took out a sheet with the seals of the old dynasty. Kaiden Olheim. No, forgive me. The true name is hidden by an archival correction. Born from the union of the Imperial line and the Lost Branch, separated after the Great Troubles. He was hidden by a village family by order of the late Empress Ardessa in order to avoid execution and palace murder. Caden did not move. Everything inside froze. Morella whispered, No. Veldor III stood as if he had been struck in the chest. Is this... He slowly exhaled. Is this true? Nioli closed her eyes. Sylvana looked at the floor. Dargit was ready to cut Morvain in half right now. Ilantis looked at no one. Caden suddenly understood why everything had felt so strange to him all this time. Why the amulet had responded to his touch. Why the magic of the ancient law seemed to recognize him. Why Ardessa's letter seemed too personal. No, he said quietly. No, I grew up in a village. I was raised by peasants. My father is a blacksmith, not an emperor. Morvain smiled softly. Upbringing does not cancel blood. Shut up. Caden's voice sounded low, heavy, dangerous. Even Dargit turned toward him. The Duke pretended not to notice. I do not need the throne for the sake of power. I need order. If you are truly the bearer of the Lost Branch, then you are the key. And I offer you an alliance that will save the Empire. Caden slowly raised his head. An alliance? Yes. You will accept my support. You will choose one of the princesses. You will enter into marriage according to the law, and together we will stop the split. And if I do not agree? Morvain did not answer at once. Instead, the agent in the silver mask stepped forward. Then we will take you alive or dead, he said without expression. And at that moment, Nioli struck. Nioli moved faster than everyone had time to realize. She snatched a short silver blade from the shadow and threw it straight into the agent's mask. The blade did not kill, but it pierced the protection. Her second step landed straight in Morvain's side, knocking him off balance. Do not touch him, she said quietly. The Duke took a step back, surprised for the first time the entire evening. So that is it, he said slowly. You knew before the others. Nioli did not answer. Caden looked at her. Nioli? She did not take her gaze off Morvain. Yes, I knew that something was wrong with your origin, but I did not know how much. The visions were blurry. You hid it from me. Yes, she said honestly. Because I was not sure, and a lie in such things breaks people. Caden wanted to answer but did not have time. Morvain made a sharp gesture with his hand. More masked men burst into the hall from behind. Sylvana immediately raised a magical barrier. Ilantis froze the floor beneath the advancing enemies. Morella whipped up a fiery whirlwind, forcing them to retreat. Dargit rushed forward, drawing both swords. Caden felt that the hall could no longer be held. A decision had to be made. Now. Because Morvain was clearly waiting for him to break. And perhaps he had almost achieved it. Caden looked at the amulet that still lay in his pocket and for some reason burned his skin through the fabric. Then at the princesses. At Veldor, at the flame, at the ice, at the shadows. At this entire impossible broken palace. And he understood that he could not allow someone else's lie to define who he was. He took a step forward. Enough. His voice sounded unexpectedly loud. Even the fight fell quiet for a second. Caden looked straight at Morvain. I do not know whether everything you said is true. I do not know whose blood flows in me. I do not know who wrote these documents and who hid whom. He clenched his fists. But I know one thing. I was raised by people who did not sell me to the throne. I was taught to work, protect, think, and not lie to myself. And if your plan is to turn me into a thing, then you miscalculated. Morvain narrowed his eyes. Beautiful words. No, simple ones. Caden pulled the amulet from his pocket. The light in the hall trembled. Half of those present gasped. The amulet shone with a soft golden glow, and a wave of ancient power passed through the hall. Sylvana opened her eyes wide. It is reacting. Ailantis quietly exhaled. To him. Morvain finally lost his calm. Give it to me. No! Caden clenched the amulet in his palm, and in the next moment the light exploded. It was not an explosion in the usual sense. No shards, fire, or smoke. Rather, a flash of ancient memory. A golden wave passed through the entire hall, and everyone saw something strange. Symbols on the walls, hidden for years, suddenly began to glow. The old runes of the throne hall awakened. Emperor Veldor gasped. This is... An ancient protective circle, Sylvana whispered. It is connected to the amulet. Morvain recoiled, for the first time all this time. No, this should not be. Caden stood in the center of the light, and the voice that sounded from the amulet was not his, but not someone else's either. Ardessa's voice. Whoever touches the sign of truth shall be accepted by the ancient line, and whoever tries to divide blood by force shall lose the right to it. Ailantis sharply dropped to one knee. Dargit froze. Morella opened her eyes wide. Sylvana whispered, confirmation. Nioli took a step back, and only Caden understood the main thing. The amulet was not simply recognizing him. It was responding to the ancient truth that Morvain was trying to hide. But along with this, something else awakened. A secret passage opened in the hall, behind the throne. A stone panel moved aside with a hollow grinding sound, and the cold of old secrets wafted from the darkness behind it. Veldor stared there as if he were seeing a ghost. I never knew. Now you know, Caden said, no longer understanding why he was speaking so calmly. And it seems we need to go there. Morvain turned pale. No. Dargit understood at once. So what he was hiding is there. Nioli nodded. And what will change everything? The passage led downward. The steps were ancient, smooth from time, and it smelled of old magic, dampness, and dust that had accumulated for centuries. Caden walked first. Beside him was Dargit, then Sylvana and Ailantis. Morella walked slightly behind, but with fireballs ready. Nioli closed the group, and Veldor, of course, went too, because it was his throne, his palace, and, as he put it, his old problems. I still do not understand how we ended up at a secret passage under the throne, he muttered. Because you have a terrible security system, Dargit answered dryly. This is my palace, thank you very much. And that is exactly why I am criticizing it, especially harshly. Caden almost smiled. Almost. Below, they found a round room, an old hall hidden from the ordinary palace world. In the center stood a stone table with carved runes. Portraits of old emperors hung on the walls, but one of them was covered with black cloth. Sylvana approached the table first. This is not just a hall. This is the archive of the true throne. She moved her fingers over the runes. Here they kept decisions about succession to the throne that could not be entered into the official code. Ailantis frowned. Why was this hall hidden? Veldor answered quietly, because my father ordered it sealed after he realized that part of the council wanted to use the secret branch of blood to manipulate the line of the throne. Caden looked at the covered portrait. Whose is it? Veldor fell silent, then carefully removed the cloth. In the portrait was a young woman with dark hair and familiar eyes. Caden stared at the image. At first he did not understand. Then he felt something inside him clench. This is... Veldor exhaled. Ardessa. The Empress? My mother. Another person stood by her shoulder in the portrait. A man. Caden recognized the facial features immediately, although he had seen them only on old papers. More decisive, rougher, with the eyes of a tracker. His father, Resh Aaron. They were together, Caden said quietly. Veldor nodded, and not only as allies. Judging by the records, they both tried to stop the split of blood that was going to be used against the throne. Sylvana lifted one of the scrolls from the table. It says here that the fifth branch was not hidden as a collateral line. It was. United? What does that mean? Caden asked. Nioli froze. She had already understood. It means, she said slowly, that you are not merely a descendant of one line. You are the result of an old union that was supposed to join the 5 branches into one. Silence. Morella asked quietly. So he is not. Not just an accidental heir, Sylvana finished. He is the living seal of the ancient agreement. Caden closed his eyes. Suddenly it became very hard for him to breathe. I did not ask for this, he said. Veldor looked at him with unexpected softness. None of us asked for what he receives by birth. Dargit crossed her arms. And what now? Nioli looked at Ardessa's covered portrait. Now, Morvain is not just a conspirator. He is a man trying to break the ancient balance for the sake of power. And you? Caden asked quietly. Did you know all this? Nioli slowly turned to him. Only fragments. I felt that you were not just a peasant, but I did not know that you were the center of the old knot. Why were you silent? Because if I had said everything when I myself was not sure, Morvain would have gotten your head before you understood who you were. Caden looked at her for a long time, and for the first time he saw not the mysterious Princess of Shadow, but a person who was afraid of losing someone important. It turned out to be unexpectedly touching, and very frightening. When they went back up, the palace was already seething. The guards were holding the corridors. The advisors were yelling at each other. Morvain had been arrested, at least officially, but not all his people in the castle had yet been cleared out. Everything could still collapse. Caden stood in the main hall with the amulet in his hand and felt strange. Not higher, not more important. He simply looked at everything with different eyes. Now he knew too much, but that did not give answers to the most painful thing, whom to choose or choose no one. The Imperial Council had already gathered. Findrel, with a devastated look and a trembling scroll, announced, according to the awakened law of the ancient throne, the bearer of the sign may confirm connection with one of the 5 branches through a marriage union or through recognition of blood. Dargit frowned. In human language, please. Findrel swallowed. Caden no longer has to marry a princess in order to become ruler. But if he does not form an alliance, the lawful power of the amulet will weaken, and Morvain will be able to challenge everything as illegal magic. Sylvana quietly swore. Morella whispered, so it is a choice again. Ailantis pressed her lips together. Nioli looked at Caden, barely blinking. He felt pressure. Not external, internal. 5 princesses, 5 different people, and no way to make everything good for everyone. I do not want to choose like a buyer at a market, he said tiredly. It should not work like this. Agreed, Dargit noted coldly. But for now it works exactly like this. Is there a way around it? Sylvana asked. Nioli answered first. There is, but it is risky. Everyone looked at her. What way? Caden asked. She was silent for a moment. Bind the amulet not with marriage, but with an oath. But it requires the voluntary sacrifice of one of the branches. Caden went cold. Sacrifice? Ailantis froze. Dargit looked away. Morella nervously swallowed. Sylvana said quietly, it means that one of the princesses will have to renounce her right to the throne in order to stabilize his power. The silence became heavy. Caden stared at them. No. Caden, Morella began. No, he repeated more harshly. I will not allow one of you to sacrifice herself so that I do not look inconvenient before the law. Dargit snorted. You think too much like a peasant, and that is almost cute. Thank you, I suppose. Ailantis stepped forward. Then what do you suggest? Caden looked at the amulet, then at all of them. And suddenly he understood. Perhaps the question was not whom he had to choose. The question was whom he could not lose. And that, alas, was an entirely different conversation. That night he did not sleep for a long time. He sat by the window in his room looking at the lights of the capital, and thought that probably any other person in his place would have gone mad long ago. There was a quiet knock at the door. He opened it. Sylvana stood on the threshold with a book in her hands. Not sleeping? Apparently that is now a common diagnosis, he answered, letting her in. Next came Morella with a tray of food, on which tea and something sweet were steaming. A few minutes later, Dargit appeared, dryly noting that you cannot be left alone with the amulet. You will start doing stupid things again. Then Ailantis appeared, who was absolutely not pleased to be in the same room with the others, but came anyway. and last was Nioli. It is as if you gathered us all on purpose, she noted. I actually did nothing, Caden said tiredly. You came yourselves. Of course, Nioli answered quietly. Otherwise it would be too simple. They stood in his room, 5 princesses, the future emperor, and a tray with an almost normal dinner. There was no music, no solemnity, no beautiful words. There was fatigue, tension, and something far more real. Caden looked at them and thought that this was probably what the moment looked like when life stopped being a story about someone else's conspiracy and became a story about your own choice. I do not know what to do, he finally admitted. I really do not know. Morella approached first, then do not hurry. Sylvana nodded. A choice made under pressure usually breaks everyone. Dargit crossed her arms. I am not going to play drama, but if you need time, take time. Atlantis looked toward the window. The main thing is, do not pretend that you do not care. Nioli stood slightly aside. And do not let Morvain decide for you who you are. Caden closed his eyes, and then, not understanding why himself, he smiled quietly. Because in the strange, impossible night overflowing with magic and politics, he suddenly understood. He was not alone, and perhaps that was the most dangerous thing, because now he could lose not only the throne, but also those who stood beside him.